All rise for the Honorable Judge Malcolm Reid, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the tense courtroom. Judge Reid, a stern-faced white man with icy blue eyes, took his seat, barely glancing at the black woman standing at the defendants' table. Jade Reynolds stood tall, unshaken by the glares around her. "You're fined $1,000. Pay it or appeal," Judge Reid snapped, ignoring her attempt to speak. Jade's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, I'm a federal prosecutor." Silence fell. The judge froze. He had just made a terrible mistake. Before we dive into this explosive story, let us know where you're watching from. If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. 3 weeks earlier, Jade Reynolds had been driving home from the federal courthouse after a grueling 12-hour workday. Her mind was focused on an upcoming trial, a high-stakes case against a corporate fraudster who had bilked elderly victims out of their retirement savings. She'd spent the past month meticulously reviewing case files, cross-referencing witness testimonies, and ensuring the evidence was airtight. Winning this case wasn't just about her career, it was about justice. Justice she had fought for her entire life, knowing firsthand how easily it could be denied to people who looked like her. The city lights flickered past her car windows as she navigated the familiar route home. She barely registered the beat of her favorite playlist in the background, too deep in thought about closing arguments. It wasn't until red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror that her focus snapped back to the present. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Her hands instinctively gripped the wheel at 10 and 2. She glanced at the speedometer. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a light. She hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, her heart pounding in her chest. Every black person in America knew this feeling, the sudden dread that came with a traffic stop, no matter how law-abiding you were. Jade took a deep breath, reminding herself, stay calm, stay polite, stay alive. The officer approached, his flashlight shining directly into her eyes. He was white, late 30s, with a square jaw and a buzz cut that screamed military. Background. His name tag read Calloway. "License and registration," he barked, his hand resting casually on his holster. Jade kept her hands visible, moving slowly as she reached for her wallet. "Officer, can I ask what I did wrong?" "You failed to signal before changing lanes," Officer Calloway said flatly, not even pretending to mask his disdain. Jade blinked. That couldn't be right. She always used her turn signal, almost obsessively so, precisely to avoid situations like this. "Are you sure?" "I'm pretty diligent about that." The officer's eyes darkened. "Are you questioning me?" Jade exhaled, sharply biting back the urge to argue. "No, sir, just surprised, that's all." "Step out of the vehicle," her breath caught. "Excuse me?" I said. "Step out of the vehicle." His hand was now firmly on his holster. Jade clenched her jaw but complied. Arguing could escalate the situation, and she wasn't about to become another headline. As she stepped onto the pavement, the cold night air bit into her skin. But it was nothing compared to the humiliation that followed. Hands on the hood. Her heart pounded as she placed her hands on the cool metal of her car's hood. Calloway frisked her right there on the side of the road, under the glare of headlights and the curious eyes of passing drivers. She could feel their stares, some pitying, some indifferent, as though this scene was nothing out of the ordinary. For them, maybe it wasn't. "Is this really necessary?" Jade asked, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her throat. "Necessary?" Calloway chuckled, rummaging through her bag on the passenger seat without asking permission. "Yeah, it is. People like you always have something to hide." Her jaw tightened. "People like you." The words hit harder than the roughness of his. "Search?" Then his hand froze as he pulled out her Department of Justice credentials. His eyes narrowed and a slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "You work for the feds?" he sneered. "Yes," Jade replied evenly, refusing to let him see how rattled she was. "I'm a federal prosecutor," his lip curled. "Figures." And just like that, Jade knew. This wasn't about a turn signal. It never had been. It was about power, control, putting her in her place. He scribbled on his ticket pad with exaggerated slowness, then tore off the citation and thrust it toward her. "There you go, counselor. Failure to signal. See you in court." Jade took the ticket without a word, her fingers trembling, not with fear, but with fury. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice, believing in the system despite its flaws. But standing there under the harsh glow of flashing lights, she realized something chilling. The system wasn't just flawed, it was rigged, upheld, by men like Calloway who wore authority like armor and wielded it like a weapon. As the officer strutted back to his cruiser, Jade climbed into her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could fight this ticket, she could win. But it wasn't about the money or the mark on her record. It was about something far more insidious, the quiet, systemic racism that tainted every level of power, from the streets to the courtroom. The engine hummed to life as she pulled back onto the road. The ticket crumpled in her fist. Jade didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a traffic stop. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that would expose corruption far deeper than she ever imagined. The question lingered in her mind as she drove into the night. How many more lives had men like Calloway and Judge Reid quietly ruined? And who was protecting them from the consequences? The present-day courtroom felt colder now, the weight of unspoken tension pressing down like an invisible hand. Judge Malcolm Reid, seated high above the room in his polished oak chair, stared at Jade Reynolds with a mix of disbelief and disdain. The words "Federal Prosecutor" hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Everyone had heard it, but no one quite knew what to do with it. For a moment, the judge's composure cracked. His gavel, once spinning confidently between his fingers, now rested motionless on the bench. He blinked as though trying to process what he'd just heard. "You're a federal prosecutor?" he repeated, his voice quieter but no less sharp. Jade stepped forward, her chin lifted, eyes locked on his. "That's correct, Your Honor. And I was trying to explain that when you cut me off." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The spectators, who had been watching with mild curiosity, now leaned forward, eyes wide. This wasn't just another routine traffic case anymore. This was something else, something bigger. Judge Reid's face hardened. He'd been on the bench for over 2 decades, and his reputation was ironclad, or so he thought. Known for his tough-on-crime stance, he often bragged about maintaining order in his courtroom. But those who knew the truth whispered a different story. Reid's toughness seemed to hit hardest when the defendants were black or brown. And today, standing before him, was not just a black woman but one with power. That didn't sit well with him. "Well," the judge finally said, forcing a cold smile, "federal prosecutor or not, that doesn't change the facts. You broke the law." Jade's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I hadn't even presented my defense." "And you won't need to," Judge Reid interrupted, regaining his arrogant poise. He leaned forward, elbows on the bench, his tone dripping with condescension. "I see people like you in my courtroom all the time, always trying to talk your way out of consequences instead of taking responsibility. People like you." The words hit like a slap, but Jade didn't flinch. She'd heard it before. From teachers who doubted her, officers who dismissed her, and now a judge who wielded power like a bludgeon. But this time, she wasn't just any woman standing before him. She was someone who knew the law inside and out, and she wasn't about to let his prejudice slide. "I hereby uphold the fine of $1,000, Judge Reid declared, his gavel slamming down with finality. "And if you have a problem with that, you're welcome to appeal." The courtroom erupted into whispers. $1,000 for a minor traffic violation. It was absurd, punitive, and clearly personal. Jade's hands clenched at her sides. She could pay the fine easily. That wasn't the point. The point was the abuse of power, the blatant disregard for due process, and the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. "Your Honor," Jade said, her voice calm but firm, "I'm not just appealing this fine, I'm filing a formal complaint for judicial misconduct." The murmurs grew louder. Judge Reid's smug expression flickered into something else, something closer to fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the side door burst open. A bailiff rushed in, his face pale. "Your Honor," the bailiff stammered, ignoring courtroom decorum in his urgency. There's an issue with one of your past cases. It's serious." The judge's face drained of color. Jade's eyes narrowed. This was no longer about a traffic ticket. Something far bigger was unraveling, and she was standing right in the middle of it. Do you think Judge Reid's reaction was justified, or was it fueled by prejudice? Comment number 1 if you believe Jade was right to challenge his ruling. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe in standing up against injustice. But the real question is, what past case could be so damning that it rattled one of the most confident judges in the district? Stay tuned, because the answer might just expose corruption deeper than anyone expected. Jade Reynolds stood frozen as the bailiff whispered urgently into Judge Reid's ear. The judge's once confident demeanor cracked like fragile glass, his face paling with every word. Whatever the issue was, it had struck a nerve. Jade's instincts kicked in. When a man like Judge Reid, known for his ironclad control over his courtroom, showed fear, it meant something big was unfolding, something dangerous. "Court is adjourned," Reid barked, slamming his gavel with more force than necessary. Everyone out. The spectators exchanged curious glances, but slowly filed out, their murmurs filling the room like static. Jade didn't move. She stood her ground, arms crossed, gaze locked on the judge. "Ms. Reynolds," Judge Reid growled, "unless you want to be held in contempt, I suggest you clear my courtroom." Jade tilted her head, studying him. He was rattled, truly rattled, and that gave her the upper hand, if only for a moment. "I'll leave," she said, voice measured. But this isn't over. She gathered her things and exited, heart pounding in her chest. Outside the courtroom, the bailiff, an older black man named Darnell who'd worked in the courthouse for over 20 years, caught her eye. Without breaking stride, he slipped a folded note into her hand, quick and discreet. "Be careful, Ms. Reynolds," he muttered under his breath, before turning away. Jade's pulse quickened as she unfolded the paper. Look into Reid's old cases. Start with Marcus Tate. Marcus Tate. The name tugged at her memory, faint but familiar. A case from years back, one of many that had passed through the system. She hurried to her office, mind racing. If Reid was this spooked, it meant there was something buried in his past, something he never expected anyone to find. Back at her desk, Jade pulled up the state's court records database. It didn't take long to find the case file. Marcus Tate, a 22-year-old black man, convicted of drug possession with intent to distribute. Sentenced to 20 years without parole. Jade frowned. That was harsh, even by Reid's standards. She clicked through the case details, and the deeper she dug, the more her unease grew. There had been no physical evidence tying Tate to the drugs found in the apartment. The only testimony came from a single witness, a white landlord with a criminal record who had recanted his statement during the appeal process. Yet, Reid had denied the appeal without so much as a hearing. Jade leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just judicial oversight. This was deliberate, calculated. And if Marcus Tate was one wrongful conviction, how many more were there? Determined to find out, Jade did something she hadn't done in years. She called Marcus Tate's mother. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was tired, wary. "Mrs. Tate? My name is Jade Reynolds. I'm a federal prosecutor, and I'm looking into your son's case." A beat of silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Marcus has been in prison for 6 years, the woman said quietly. "You're the first person who's called about him since they locked him up." Jade's throat tightened. "I believe. Your son was wrongfully convicted. Can we meet?" The next morning, Jade sat in the cramped living room of Mrs. Tate's modest apartment. Framed photos of Marcus as a boy lined the shelves, his smiling face a painful contrast to the reality. He now faced behind bars. "Marcus never stood a chance," Mrs. Tate said, her voice thick with suppressed emotion. "That Judge Reid, he didn't even pretend to listen. Just looked at my boy like he was already guilty." Jade nodded, scribbling notes. "Did you ever file a complaint?" Mrs. Tate laughed bitterly. "We tried. My lawyer sent papers to the Judicial Review Board, but they said there was no evidence of misconduct. We couldn't afford to push further. And the public defender Marcus might as well have been working for the prosecution." Jade's pen stilled. The public defender. Another piece of the puzzle. Back at her office, she ran a search on the attorney who had represented Marcus, Clayton Weller. The name alone didn't raise alarms, but cross-referencing his cases with Judge Reid's courtroom painted a damning picture. Weller had handled nearly 50 cases in Reid's court over the past decade, and in every case involving a black defendant, the outcome had been disproportionately harsh. Denied appeals, maximum sentences, overturned pleas. Jade's stomach churned. This wasn't coincidence, this was systemic. Her phone buzzed. A message from Malik, her friend and trusted investigative journalist. Checked into Reid like you asked. Whispers about campaign donations from some shady pack. We'll keep digging. Be careful. People who poke this bear don't usually come out unscathed. Jade exhaled slowly. Campaign donations. That explained how Reid had maintained his seat for so long, despite the numerous complaints filed against him. He wasn't just a rogue judge. He was protected by people with power and money. People who had a vested interest in keeping men like Marcus Tate behind bars. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Jade had a folder thick with evidence. Not enough to take Reid down. Not yet, but enough to know she was on the right path, and enough to realize just how dangerous that path was. Her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Reynolds," she said cautiously. A deep voice, calm and deliberate, spoke on the other end. "You're digging in places you shouldn't. Drop it, or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Jade stared at her, phone heart racing. The threat was clear, but so was her resolve. They wanted her to back down. That meant she was getting close, too close for their comfort. The threat echoed in Jade Reynolds' mind long after the line went dead. "Drop it, or you'll regret it." She sat motionless at her desk, phone still clutched in her hand, as the weight of what she had uncovered settled over her like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just about Marcus Tate anymore. It was bigger, systemic corruption reaching deep into the heart of the judicial system, protected by powerful figures who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got too close. But Jade wasn't backing down. She secured her files, uploaded everything to an encrypted cloud server, and set her phone to record every call automatically. If they were coming for her, she'd make sure the world knew exactly why. The next morning, the retaliation began in earnest. Jade arrived at her office to find the door slightly ajar. Frowning, she pushed it open and froze. Papers were scattered. Across the floor, drawers yanked out and her computer screen flickered ominously. Someone had been here and they hadn't been subtle about it. "Ms. Reynolds?" a junior clerk called from the hallway, eyes wide. "Everything okay?" Jade forced a smile. "Just a break-in. Call security." But she already knew security. Wouldn't find anything. Whoever did this hadn't left fingerprints. This wasn't a random burglary, it was a message. The real punch came an hour later. Her boss, Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Mendez, summoned her to his office. He looked uncomfortable, tapping his pen against the desk as she sat down. "Jade," he began, voice tight, "I just got a call from the Judicial Ethics Board. Someone filed an anonymous complaint against you for professional misconduct." Jade's breath caught. "Misconduct based on what?" Mendez sighed, sliding a printed email across the desk. "Allegedly, you're using your position to intimidate sitting judges, specifically Judge Reid." Her heart pounded in her chest. "This is absurd." "I know," Mendez said, rubbing his temple, "but it's serious. If the board takes this further, you could face suspension, maybe even disbarment." Jade leaned back in her chair, mind racing. This was calculated, swift retaliation. They weren't just trying to scare her. They were trying to destroy her career before she could expose them. "I'm not dropping this case," she said firmly. "There's corruption here, and it goes beyond Reid. I have evidence." Mendez looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you'd better make damn sure that evidence is bulletproof, because they're coming for you with everything they've got." By the end of the day, the threats escalated. Jade returned to her car to find her tires slashed and a crude note scrawled across the windshield in red marker. "Stop digging, or you'll be buried." Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "Still think you're the smart one?" a voice drawled. "Walk away, little girl, before you end up like Marcus Tate, forgotten." Jade's blood ran cold. They weren't just threatening her. They were threatening her life. That night she met with Malik, her journalist friend, in a quiet corner of a nearly empty cafe. His laptop was open, showing search results on Judge Reid and his connections. "I found something," Malik muttered, eyes darting around as he spoke. Reid's campaign for re-election was funded almost entirely by a packy called Justice First. "Guess who the chairman is?" Jade leaned in. "Who?" "Charles Devereux," Malik replied grimly. "Big-time real estate tycoon, quietly bankrolls. Judicial campaigns for judges who rule in his favor. He's got investments in private prisons, too. Every conviction Reid hands down, it's money in Devereux's pocket." Jade exhaled slowly, fury boiling in her chest. This wasn't just judicial bias, this was a for-profit pipeline, funneling black and brown bodies into prisons while men like Devereux counted their profits. "I need more," Jade said. "I need proof that Devereux and Reid are connected beyond campaign donations. Paper trails, emails, bank records." Malik hesitated. "Jade, you're already a target. You sure you want to push this further?" "I don't have a choice," she said quietly. "If I back down, they win, and more people like Marcus Tate lose their lives to this broken system." Malik nodded, determination hardening his features. "I'll keep digging, but watch your back. These aren't just corrupt men. They're powerful and they play dirty." The next blow came 2 days later. Jade was leaving the courthouse after a long day of reviewing case files when flashing lights filled her rearview mirror. Her heart sank as she saw the familiar face of Officer Calloway approaching her window. "Evening, Ms. Reynolds," he drawled, hand already resting on his holster. "License and registration." Jade clenched her jaw. "Really, another traffic stop?" "You fit the description of someone involved in a robbery," Calloway said with a slow smirk, mind stepping out of the vehicle. Her fingers hovered over her phone, ready to hit record. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," he sneered. "Now step out or I'll make you." Reluctantly, Jade complied, her mind racing. This wasn't just harassment. This was an orchestrated attempt to intimidate her, to paint her as a criminal and discredit her before she could expose the truth. Calloway frisked her roughly, far more than protocol required, while another officer rummaged through her car. Finally, Calloway held up a small baggie containing white powder. "Looks like possession to me," he said, grinning maliciously. "You're under arrest." Jade's stomach dropped. It was a setup, plain and simple, handcuffed and shoved into the back of the cruiser. She stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. They weren't just threatening her livelihood anymore. They were threatening her freedom. Comment number 1 if you think Jade was right to keep fighting, despite the threats. Like and subscribe if you believe corruption like this needs to be exposed. But the real question is, how far will the system go to silence her? And can Jade survive long enough to bring the truth to light? Jade Reynolds sat in the cold, fluorescent-lit holding cell, her wrists raw from the handcuffs Officer Calloway had so gleefully tightened. She'd been processed like any common criminal, fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of her belongings. The only thing that kept her steady was the burning fury in her chest. They'd planted drugs in her car. They wanted to destroy her credibility before she could expose them. But they had underestimated her resilience. After what felt like hours, her lawyer, a sharp-eyed black woman named Camille Foster, finally arrived. Camille had been Jade's friend since law school, and her expression was a mix of disbelief and controlled rage. "Possession," Camille hissed as the guard unlocked the cell. "They really think you'd be stupid enough to drive around with coke in your car?" Jade stood, shaking her head. "It's a setup. Calloway was too smug, like he was waiting for the moment to slap the cuffs on me." Camille nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'm filing a motion to dismiss. They won't have solid chain of custody evidence because the drugs weren't yours." "This reeks of corruption." Jade's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not just corruption, it's organized, coordinated. Someone powerful is pulling the strings, and I think I know who." Camille paused, phone halfway to her ear. "Reid?" "Reid's just a pawn," Jade replied, voice low. "The real player is Charles Devereux. Malik traced campaign donations from a packy he controls straight to Reid's re-election fund. And guess what else? That pack has ties to private prison investments." Camille's eyes widened. "So every conviction Reid hands down, especially for black defendants, lines Devereux's pockets." "Exactly," Jade said. And now that I've connected the dots, they're trying to bury me before I can expose it. Camille's jaw tightened. Well, they'll have to do better than a sloppy drug plant. I'm getting you out of here. Tonight. True to her word, Camille had Jade released on her own recognizance within hours. As they exited the station, Malik was waiting, pacing near the curb. You okay? He asked, eyes scanning her face for signs of distress. I'm fine, Jade replied, though exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. But they're escalating. And if they're this desperate, it means we're close to something they can't afford to let see daylight. Malik nodded grimly. I kept digging while you were inside. And Jade, it's worse than we thought. He pulled out his tablet and showed her a spreadsheet he'd compiled. It listed dozens of cases. Black defendants. Harsh sentences, all presided over by Judge Reid. But the pattern didn't stop there. The public defenders assigned to many of these cases were the same. Clayton Weller and 2 others with known ties to Reid's court. These lawyers weren't defending their clients, Malik said, voice tight with anger. They were practically serving them up on a silver platter. Rushed pleas, suppressed evidence, missed deadlines. It's like they were working for Reid and Devereux, not their clients. Jade's stomach churned. They were feeding the private prison pipeline. Convictions meant bodies in cells, and bodies in cells meant profit. Exactly, Malik said. But it's not just Reid and the lawyers. I found sealed complaints against other judges in the district, white, conservative-leaning, all with unusually high conviction rates for minorities. Every single one of them received campaign support from Devereux's passee. Jade rubbed her temples, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her. This wasn't just one corrupt judge. It was a network, a machine designed to exploit the legal system for profit, with black lives as collateral. We need to go public, Malik urged. Expose the whole damn thing. Jade hesitated. If we go public without airtight proof, they'll discredit. First, I barely got out of jail tonight. What's next? Planting evidence in my home. Freezing my bank accounts. Worse? Malik frowned. So what's the play? Jade's eyes narrowed. We follow the money. Devereux didn't just fund Reid's campaign. He funded the entire network. There's got to be a paper trail, bank transfers, shell companies, something that ties them all together. Malik nodded slowly. I know a guy who can trace the PAC's financials, but Jade, if we go after Devereux, we're poking the bear. He's not just some local power broker. He's got connections at the state and federal levels. I don't care, Jade said firmly. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about Marcus Tate, about every black man and woman who sat in Reid's courtroom and never stood a chance. We either fight this corruption head-on, or we let it keep destroying lives. Malik sighed, running a hand down his face. All right, I'll get my contact on the financials, but you need to lay low, Jade. They've already shown they're willing to cross lines. If Devereux gets desperate... I know, Jade interrupted, but I'm not backing down. Later that night, back in her apartment, Jade fortified her defenses. She changed all her passwords, encrypted her files, and backed up everything onto multiple cloud servers. She couldn't afford to lose the evidence she'd gathered. Not now. As she shut down her laptop, her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Jade's fingers hovered over the screen before she answered, voice cold. Reynolds. A low chuckle crackled. Through the line. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Who is this? Jade demanded. Someone who's been watching you dig your own grave, the voice replied smoothly. You had your warning, counselor. Walk away. This city doesn't belong to people like you. Jade's grip tightened on the phone. People? Like me? You mean people who don't turn a blind eye to injustice? People who don't profit off the suffering of others? The voice sighed, almost amused. Righteousness won't save you. Walk away, or you'll end up like Marcus Tate, fighting for justice from the inside of a cell. Or worse, the line clicked dead. Jade stared at the phone, heart pounding. They were watching, following, waiting for her to slip up. But fear wouldn't stop her. If anything, it fueled her determination, because now she knew the truth. Judge. Reid was just the tip of the iceberg, and she was about to blow the entire operation wide open. Jade Reynolds barely slept that night. The voice on the phone echoed in her head. "Walk away or you'll end up like Marcus Tate." Threats like that weren't just bluffs, not when they came from people with power, people who had already proven they could manipulate the system and destroy lives without leaving a trace. Morning light filtered through her window as she sat at her kitchen table, sipping stale coffee and scrolling through the files Malik had sent overnight. His contact had traced the flow of money from Devereux's PAC, and the pattern was undeniable. Donations funneled into judicial campaigns, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, and transfers to shell companies linked to private prison contracts. Reid was one of many judges caught in the web, but he was the most visible pawn, the one arrogant enough to leave a trail. Jade knew what came next, exposure. But exposure meant risk, and she wasn't naive enough to think the threats would stop. If anything, they'd escalate. By the time she left her apartment, the first blow had already landed. Her front door was splattered with red paint, thick, dripping streaks that spelled out a single word: traitor. The landlord stood nearby, shaking his head. "Ms. Reynolds, I can't have this kind of attention here. If this keeps up, I'll have to ask you to leave." Jade swallowed her anger. "I understand, I'll handle it." But handling it wasn't so easy. When she reached her car, all 4 tires were slashed. A crude drawing of a noose had been carved into the driver's side door. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with rage. This wasn't intimidation anymore, it was personal. She called Malik as she waited for a tow truck. "They hit my car. The threats are escalating." "Damn," Malik muttered. "You need to fall back for a bit, work from somewhere safe." "Safe doesn't exist when you're exposing corruption," Jade replied, voice tight. "How's the story coming?" "I'm drafting it now," Malik said. "But Jade, listen, this isn't just Reid and Devereux. I found connections to the city attorney's office. Someone higher up is protecting this whole operation." Jade's stomach twisted. "The city attorney? You're sure?" "Positive," Malik confirmed. "Emails, private meetings, it's all in the metadata. But if we drop this story without bulletproof evidence, they'll bury it, and you." As if on cue, Jade's phone buzzed with a new email. She opened it and froze. It was from the city attorney's office, officially notifying her that an ethics complaint had been filed against her. The charge? Obstruction of justice and abuse of prosecutorial power. Her mouth went dry. They were trying to disbar her. Jade called Camille immediately. "They're coming after my license. Ethics complaint, filed this morning." Camille cursed, under her breath. "They're trying to cut you off at the knees. If they suspend your license, you can't file motions, can't represent cases. Hell, you can't even legally investigate." "I know," Jade muttered, pacing beside her vandalized car. "But they're moving fast because they're scared. It means we're close." Camille's voice softened. "Jade, close doesn't mean safe. You need to think about your career, your life." Jade glanced at the carved noose on her car door. "My career doesn't mean anything if I let them keep destroying lives." We pushed forward. That night, Jade worked late at the courthouse, poring through more sealed case files. She had just stepped outside, her briefcase tucked under her arm when headlights flared in front of her. A black SUV idled across the street, engine rumbling like a predator waiting to pounce. Jade's steps slowed. Her phone was in her pocket, recording as always. She veered toward the side exit, heart pounding, but the SUV's lights flickered once, a warning, then it sped off. Breathing hard, Jade hurried to her backup car, an old sedan she kept for emergencies. The slashed tires on her main car had taught her to stay prepared. As she drove home, her phone buzzed with another text, this time from an unknown number. "You've been warned. Next time it won't just be your car." Jade gripped the wheel tighter. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. They were laying the groundwork to destroy her completely, professionally, financially, physically, if necessary. She called Malik again. "We need to go public. Now." "Are you sure?" he asked, voice tense. "Once this goes live, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," Jade said. "If they're this desperate, it means we've already won. We just need the world to see it." Comment number 1. If you think Jade is right to keep pushing, despite the threats. Like and subscribe if you believe corruption like this must be exposed, no matter the cost. But here's the real question. What happens when the system itself fights back? Will Jade's evidence be enough to survive the storm that's coming? Stay tuned, because the fight is far from over. Jade Reynolds sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, eyes flicking between the documents Malik had sent and the official ethics complaint email from the city attorney's office. It was a textbook smear campaign. Accuse the whistleblower of misconduct, tarnish her reputation, and make her evidence look like the desperate grasping of a disgraced prosecutor. The system was closing in, protecting itself like an immune response to infection. Only this time, Jade wasn't the infection. Corruption was, and she wasn't about to be purged quietly. Her phone buzzed. Malik's name flashed on the screen. "Jade," he said, voice tense. "I've got the article ready, but are you sure about this? Once we publish, you'll be public enemy number one." Jade exhaled slowly. "I'm already their target. At least if the truth is out there, they can't bury me in silence." "Fair point," Malik muttered. "I've cross-verified the financials, the PAC connections, and Reid's sentencing patterns. It's airtight. But I gotta warn you, this won't just embarrass them, it'll burn them to the ground, and people like Devereaux, they don't burn quietly." "I'm counting on it," Jade replied. "Do it." An hour later, Malik's article went live. Judges for Sale: How Charles Devereaux and Judge Malcolm Reid Turned Justice into Profit. It detailed everything: Reid's harsh sentencing of black defendants, the kickbacks from private prison, contracts, the PAC money flowing from Devereaux's empire into judicial campaigns across the state. Jade's name was front and center as the whistleblower, complete with quotes from her about the need for accountability. Within minutes, her phone exploded with notifications. Calls from reporters, texts from colleagues, and emails from civil rights organizations flooded in. Social media blew up, the hashtag Justice for Marcus Tate trending within hours. It wasn't just a local story anymore, it was national, but the backlash came just as fast. By noon, conservative media outlets were running counter-narratives, painting Jade as a rogue prosecutor with a personal vendetta. Anonymous sources claimed she had fabricated evidence to target Judge Reid, and one particularly vicious op-ed accused her of weaponizing race to undermine the judiciary. Jade expected the noise. What she didn't expect was the personal attack that followed. That evening, as she left the courthouse after a long day of meetings with civil rights groups and sympathetic lawmakers, she found two officers waiting beside her backup car. The sedan she'd been using since her primary vehicle was vandalized. One of them, Officer Calloway, wore the same smug grin from their first encounter. "Ms. Reynolds," Calloway drawled, hand resting on his holster. "Step away from the vehicle." Jade froze. "On what grounds?" "Anonymous tip," Calloway replied, eyes gleaming with malice. "Said there's something suspicious in your car. Mind if we take a look?" Jade's heart pounded. This was it. The next move in their playbook. A planted weapon, drugs, anything to justify an arrest and destroy her credibility. She couldn't let them control the narrative. "I do mind," she said, raising her phone and hitting record. "Without probable cause or a warrant, you have no right to search my vehicle." Calloway's grin widened. "Probable cause." He gestured to the other officer, who knelt beside the car and, with theatrical exaggeration, pointed at the rear tire. "Looks like there's a suspicious package taped under the wheel well," the officer announced. Jade's stomach dropped. They were framing her. Again. "I want a supervisor on site," Jade snapped, stepping back while keeping the camera steady. "And I'm calling my lawyer, right now." Calloway took a step closer, his expression darkening. "You think that phone's gonna save you? The system doesn't work for people like you, Reynolds." Jade didn't flinch. "Maybe not, but I know how to make noise, and this time the world's already watching." As she spoke, several bystanders had gathered, some already holding up their own phones, recording the scene. The power dynamic shifted. Calloway hesitated, eyes darting between the cameras and Jade's defiant stance. A tense silence stretched until a sharp voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" Camille Foster, Jade's lawyer, strode across the parking lot, heels clicking with authority. "Unless you have a warrant or clear probable cause, my client isn't answering another question." Calloway's smirk faltered. "We got a tip." Camille held up her phone. "From an unverified source, I'm sure. This conversation is..." being recorded. And I'd love to hear you explain to a judge why you're harassing a federal prosecutor in retaliation for exposing corruption." The officers exchanged glances. After a moment, Calloway stepped back, hands raised. "Have a nice night, Ms. Reynolds." Jade didn't move until both officers were out of sight. Only then did she exhale, adrenaline leaving her legs shaky. "That was close," Camille muttered. "Too close." Jade nodded grimly. "They're not just trying to silence me, they're trying to erase me." That night, Malik called with more bad news. "Jade, I just got word from one of my sources at City Hall. The Ethics Board isn't just reviewing your conduct. They're fast-tracking a suspension hearing tomorrow morning." Jade's heart sank. "They're trying to strip my license before I can press charges against Reid and Devereux." "Exactly," Malik confirmed. "And if they succeed, you'll lose access to every legal tool you have." Jade rubbed her temples, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. But beneath the fatigue was something stronger. Resolve. "They're panicking," she said quietly. "Which means we're winning. But if they want a war, we'll give them one." The E. Next morning, Jade stood before the State Ethics Board, flanked by Camille and Malik. The hearing was supposed to be impartial, but the panel's composition told another story. 3 of the 5 members had ties to politicians funded by Devereux's purse. The lead panelist, an older white man with thinning gray hair, cleared his throat. "Ms. Reynolds, you stand accused of abusing your position to intimidate sitting judges and undermining the integrity of the judicial system. How do you plead?" Jade met his gaze without flinching. "I plead the truth, and I have evidence." She handed over a thick folder, bank statements, case files, and sworn affidavits from former public defenders who had come forward after Malik's article went viral. One, a young white lawyer named Eric Vasquez, had tearfully confessed how he'd been pressured by senior partners to steer black clients toward plea deals, ensuring quick convictions under Judge Reid's gavel. The panelist skimmed the first few pages, face tightening with every word. He glanced up, clearly unnerved. "We'll need time to review this." Camille leaned in, voice sharp. "Take all the time you need. But while you do, the press will be waiting outside for our statement. Shall we tell them the Ethics Board is more interested in protecting corrupt judges than holding them accountable?" The panelist's jaw clenched. After a long pause, he sighed. "Pending further investigation, the suspension hearing is postponed." Relief flooded Jade's chest. It wasn't a win, not yet, but it was enough to keep fighting. Outside the courthouse, Malik was already on the phone, likely updating his editor. Camille squeezed Jade's shoulder. "You bought yourself time. Now what?" Jade's expression hardened. "Now we take the fight to their doorstep." The morning after Jade Reynolds narrowly escaped suspension, the air outside her apartment felt colder, sharper. It wasn't just the weather. It was the weight of knowing the system she was fighting had now turned its full force against her. The Ethics Board had backed down for the moment, but the reprieve felt fragile, like a cracked window ready to shatter with the slightest pressure. Jade sat at her kitchen table, flipping through the files Malik had compiled. There was enough evidence here to blow the corruption wide open. Bank transfers from Devereux's Paquis to Judge Reid's campaign fund, sealed case files showing disproportionately harsh sentences for black defendants, and internal emails from the city attorney's office discussing containing the situation. But evidence was only powerful if the right people saw it, and right now, the wrong people were doing everything they could to suppress it. Her phone buzzed. It was Malik. "Jade, you're not gonna like this. Try me," Jade muttered, already bracing for bad news. "The city attorney just held a press conference," Malik said. "They're officially filing an ethics complaint against you. Not just for misconduct. Now they're claiming malicious prosecution and abuse of power." Jade's stomach dropped. "Malicious prosecution? They're accusing me of targeting Reid and Devereux?" "Exactly," Malik confirmed. "They're spinning the narrative hard, saying you're using your position to settle personal grievances against white officials, and the worst part, some local outlets are running with it." Jade rubbed her temples, frustration bubbling under the surface. "They're trying to make me the villain. Classic play. Discredit the whistleblower, muddy the waters, and the public won't know who to believe." "Yeah," Malik said grimly. And if they succeed, not only will you lose your license, but any case you've ever worked on could be called into question. Jade's mind raced. They weren't just trying to silence her, they were trying to erase her credibility entirely. If they could paint her as a rogue prosecutor abusing her power, everything she'd uncovered would be dismissed as a personal vendetta, and the people truly abusing power would walk away untouched. "I'm not letting them win," Jade said, voice steely. "We go on the offensive. I want every piece of evidence we have sent to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force, and every major news outlet that's not in Devereaux's pocket." Malik hesitated. "That's gonna make you an even bigger target." "I'm already a target," Jade shot back. "I'd rather go down fighting than let them destroy more lives like Marcus Tate's." Later that afternoon, as Jade prepared to leave for a meeting with Camille, she noticed something strange. Her bank app showed multiple alerts, overdraft warnings, declined transactions. Frowning, she clicked into her account. Every dollar she had was gone, frozen. Panic surged through her veins. She called the bank, heart pounding. "Ms. Reynolds," the customer service rep said sympathetically, "your accounts were frozen under a federal hold. There's an active investigation into potential financial misconduct tied to your name." Jade's grip tightened on the phone. "What misconduct?" "I'm not authorized to see the details," the rep replied, "but the hold was requested by the city attorney's office." Of course, they weren't just attacking her career, they were cutting off her resources, isolating her financially. Without money, she couldn't pay for her legal defense, couldn't fund her investigation, couldn't fight back effectively. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Camille. "Jade," Camille said, voice tight with worry. "I just got word that Judge Reid issued a bench warrant for your arrest." Jade blinked, stunned. "For what?" "Obstruction of justice," Camille replied. "They're claiming you tampered with evidence related to Reid's cases. It's bogus, obviously, but they're making their move." Jade's heart pounded. In her chest. An arrest warrant. If they got her into custody, they could plant anything, fabricate evidence, coerce statements, or worse. The system she had trusted for so long was now weaponized against her. "I'm not getting arrested," Jade said firmly. "I'm going underground." Camille hesitated. "Jade, running could make you look guilty." "Staying makes me vulnerable," Jade countered. "I need time to finish what I started. Can you stall the warrant? File an emergency injunction?" "I'll try," Camille promised, "but be careful. They're not playing fair." Jade stuffed critical documents into a go bag, heart racing. As she stepped out of her apartment, she spotted a familiar figure across the street. Officer Calloway, leaning casually against his squad car, eyes locked on her. He smirked, lifting his phone to his ear. Jade didn't wait to find out who he was calling. She slipped into the alley behind her building, Malik's number already dialing. "I'm burned," she said the moment he answered. "They froze my accounts and issued a warrant. I need a safe house," Malik cursed. "I got you. Meet me at the old print shop on 5th. No cameras, no paper trail." Jade moved quickly, ducking through side streets, heart pounding with every glance over her shoulder. The city, once familiar and safe, now felt like enemy territory. By the time she reached the print shop, night had fallen. Malik was waiting. Inside, laptop open and multiple phones scattered across the table. "Good news," he said, typing furiously. "I sent the full evidence package to the FBI and DOJ. They can't ignore it now, not with the paper trail we've built." Jade exhaled slowly, relief and anxiety warring within her. "And the bad news?" Malik's expression darkened. "The city attorney's office isn't working alone. I traced some of the encrypted emails coordinating your takedown. They're coming from the state attorney general's office." Jade's breath caught. "The AG, that's top-level protection. Devereaux must have dirt on them too." "Looks like it," Malik confirmed, "which means even if we take down Reid, the system will keep protecting itself unless we expose everyone." Jade nodded slowly. "Then we don't. Just expose them. We burn the whole damn network to the ground. Comment number 1 if you think Jade is right to keep fighting, despite the system closing in on her. Like and subscribe if you believe corruption like this must be exposed, no matter the cost. But here's the real question. With the state attorney general involved, how deep does the corruption go? And can Jade survive long enough to uncover the truth? Stay tuned, because the battle is far from over. Jade Reynolds sat in the dimly lit back room of the old print shop, surrounded by stacks of papers, a buzzing laptop and burner phones Malik had scattered across the table like weapons. Her face was illuminated by the glow of the screen, but her mind was fixed on the ticking clock. The warrant for her arrest was active, her bank accounts were frozen, and the state attorney general was now implicated in the very corruption she was fighting to expose. The system wasn't just retaliating, it was closing in like a vice. "Jade," Malik muttered, eyes locked on his laptop screen. "I just intercepted an internal memo from the city attorney's office. They're pushing for a fast-track indictment. Grand jury hearing set for next week." Jade's breath caught. A grand jury, without proper discovery? "They're not playing by the rules," Malik replied grimly. "They're trying to indict you before the DOJ can act on the evidence we sent. If they get an indictment first, you'll be painted as a criminal, and anything you filed against Reid, Devereaux, or the AG will look like retaliation." Jade leaned back, heart pounding. "They're silencing me through the same system I spent my career defending," Malik nodded. "And they're good at it. They've done this before to activists, journalists, anyone who threatens the power structure. The only difference is you've gotten further than most." Jade's fists clenched. "We need something bigger. Something that blows this up so publicly they can't spin it." As if on cue, Camille burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. "I just got off the phone with an insider at the State Attorney General's office," she said, tossing a folder onto the table. "The AG's team is coordinating directly with Devereaux's legal counsel. They're planning to claim you falsified the PAC connection documents. If they sell that to the grand jury, you're done." Jade flipped through the papers, her eyes narrowing. "So they're not just covering up corruption, they're fabricating crimes to protect it." "Exactly," Camille said, sinking into a chair. "We need leverage, something they can't bury." Jade's mind raced. "What about live testimony? If we can get someone from the inside to flip publicly, they can't control the narrative." Malik frowned. "You're talking about a whistleblower." "That's risky. Who would stick their neck out?" Jade tapped the folder. "Clayton Weller," Camille's eyebrows shot up. "The public defender who pushed Marcus Tate into a plea deal?" "He's dirty, Jade." "Dirty but expendable," Jade countered. "Reid and Devereaux used him, but they won't protect him now. If Weller thinks he's the next fall guy, he might flip to save himself." Malik nodded slowly. "If we can get him to talk, on video, live stream, he could confirm the whole operation. But finding him won't be easy. He's been laying low since your story broke." Jade stood, grabbing her jacket. "Then we flush him out." Within hours, Malik had traced Weller's last known location to a high-end condo downtown, far beyond what a public defender's salary should afford. Another red flag. Camille made a few calls and confirmed that the condo was leased under a shell company connected to one of Devereaux's real estate holdings. "Classic," Malik muttered as they parked a block away from the building. "Devereaux pays his foot soldiers well until they're no longer useful." Jade adjusted the ball cap she wore to stay inconspicuous. "If Weller's hiding here, he knows the walls are closing in. We offer him a way out." Camille glanced at her phone. "We need to move fast. I just got an alert. Judge Reid scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. They're going to argue you're a flight risk and push for immediate detention." Jade's jaw tightened. "Then we get Weller tonight." They approached the building quietly, bypassing the front entrance and slipping through the underground garage. Malik had hacked the building's security system, pulling up live camera feeds on his tablet. "Apartment 14B, he muttered. Their lights are on." Jade didn't hesitate. She knocked firmly, stepping to the side to avoid standing directly in front of the peephole. There was a pause, then a cautious voice from inside. "Who is it?" "Clayton, it's Jade Reynolds," she called, keeping her tone calm but urgent. "I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to save your ass." Silence. Then the sound of multiple locks clicking. The door cracked open, and Weller's pale, sweat-slicked face appeared. "You're out of your mind," he hissed, glancing nervously down the hallway. "Do you know how many people are looking for you right now?" I know exactly how many, Jade shot back. And they're not looking to protect you. They're setting you up as the next scapegoat. You're the perfect fall guy, dirty hands, no real power. When this blows up, they'll hang you out to dry. Weller swallowed hard, eyes darting between Jade and Malik. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only one offering you a way out, Jade replied. Testify publicly on video. Confirm everything. The fixed cases, the PAC kickbacks, Reid's sentencing quotas. In exchange, I'll make sure the DOJ treats you as a cooperating witness. Weller hesitated, fear etched into every line of his face. If I talk, Devereaux will kill me. Malik stepped forward, holding up his phone. If you talk live, they can't silence you without making it obvious. The second your testimony hits the internet, you're not just a threat, you're a headline. And headlines are harder to kill. Jade leaned in. You're already drowning, Weller. This is your life raft. Take it, or get pulled under with. The rest of them. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. Back at the print shop, they set up a live stream, positioning Weller in front of a plain backdrop. His hands trembled as he spoke, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. But the words poured out. How Judge Reid funneled black defendants into quick plea deals. How Devereaux's PAC funded judicial campaigns in exchange for favorable rulings. How the State Attorney General's office protected the whole operation. It was raw, ugly, and undeniable. Malik monitored the stream, watching as viewer numbers skyrocketed into the thousands, then tens of thousands. Journalists picked up the feed within minutes, and civil rights organizations amplified it across every platform. By the time Weller finished speaking, the hashtag #OnDevereauxGate was trending nationwide. Jade exhaled slowly, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. We just threw a grenade into their cover-up. Camille's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and cursed. They're moving fast. There's an APB out for you, Jade. Every cop in the city is looking for you. Jade's stomach tightened. They'll come here next. Malik nodded, already shutting down the equipment. We scatter, regroup later. But Jade, this was big. You just forced their hand. As they fled into the night, Jade's mind raced. The system had struck back hard. But now, with the truth out in the open and the world watching, it was her turn to strike even harder. Jade Reynolds sat on a creaky chair in the dimly lit back room of the old print shop, her laptop glowing faintly as she scrolled through the latest batch of documents Malik had decrypted. Each new file added another layer to the corruption she was exposing. Bank transfers from Devereaux's shell companies to judicial campaigns, memos between the city attorney's office and Judge Reid discussing priority cases, and, most damning of all, a confidential email chain involving the State Attorney General's office. The emails were cold, clinical, and incriminating. One message stood out, flagged with high importance. Ensure Reynolds is neutralized before the hearing. If she reaches the DOJ, containment will be impossible. Devereaux expects discretion. Jade's breath caught. They weren't just trying to discredit her. They were planning to neutralize her. The word hung in the air like smoke from a gun. This wasn't just professional sabotage, it was personal. They were willing to destroy her life, her future, to protect their empire. Malik leaned over her shoulder, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. They're getting desperate. If they're willing to talk like this over email, it means they're scrambling. Scrambling, Jade muttered, but still dangerous. If Devereaux has the State Attorney General in his pocket, they have the power to do more than just freeze my accounts or issue warrants. They can make me disappear. Malik's jaw tightened. Then we hit them before they hit you. We need to go public, full blast. Not just another article. A press conference, live stream, everything. Put the evidence out so wide they can't silence it. Jade hesitated. If we go that route, they'll come at us hard. And if they can't discredit us legally, they'll come after you. Physically, Malik finished grimly. Yeah, I know. But sitting here waiting for the next blow isn't an option. Jade nodded slowly. Let's do it, but we need backup. Someone with authority outside of Devereaux's reach. Camille, her lawyer, arrived an hour later, face tight with concern. She glanced at the decrypted emails and whistled low. The AG's office? Damn, Jade. You're not just kicking the hornet's nest, you're torching it. Good, Jade said flatly. Hornets don't deserve safe nests. Camille sat down, pulling out her phone. I'll call my contact at the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. He's clean, old school, by the book. If anyone can get federal protection for you, while we blow this open, it's him. While Camille made the call, Malik set up a secure live stream feed. They weren't waiting for news outlets to catch up. They'd deliver the truth straight to the public. But just as Jade began compiling the final batch of documents for upload, her laptop screen flickered, then went black. What the hell, she muttered, tapping the keyboard. Nothing. Malik's phone buzzed. He glanced down, face paling. Jade, someone just pinged my IP. They found us. The words barely left his mouth when the lights in the print shop cut out. The hum of the ancient fluorescent bulbs died, plunging the room into darkness. Jade's heart pounded. We need to move, now. Malik grabbed his backpack, shoving hard. Drives and thumb drives inside while Jade secured her phone and remaining documents. Camille was already by the door, phone to her ear. They're cutting the power to flush you out, she hissed. My DOJ contact says he's dispatching agents, but they're 20 minutes out. You don't have 20 minutes, Jade peeked. Through the blinds, a black SUV idled across the street, engine rumbling. Two figures stepped out, silhouettes sharp against the streetlight. They're here, she whispered. Without hesitation, Malik guided them toward the shop's back exit. There's an alley that connects to the next block. If we can get to my car, we can lose them in traffic. But as they slipped into the alley, tires screeched at the far end. Another SUV blocked the exit. Jade's mind raced. Split up! They can't follow all of us. No way, Malik snapped. They're not after me, they're after you. The reason you're in this mess, Jade shot back. I'm not letting you get caught in the crossfire. Before Malik could argue, Camille tugged Jade's arm. Emergency exit behind the next building. It leads to the subway station. If you get underground, you can lose them. Jade hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. Go. I'll meet. You at the safe house? Heart pounding, she sprinted through the alley, keeping low as headlights swept across the brick walls. Behind her, Malik and Camille headed in the opposite direction, drawing attention. Jade reached the emergency exit, just as a third figure emerged from the shadows. Officer Calloway. Going somewhere, Reynolds, he sneered, hand already on. His holster. Jade froze, mind racing. He was blocking her only escape route. Funny thing, Calloway continued, stepping closer. Corrupt people get sloppy. You made some powerful enemies and they don't like loose ends. Jade's hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the pepper spray keychain she always carried. Last chance, Calloway warned, voice low. Walk away, drop the case. Go back to being another nobody and maybe you live to see next week. Jade's eyes narrowed. I didn't fight this hard just to walk away. Calloway's hand twitched toward his gun. In that split second, Jade moved. She sprayed the pepper spray directly into his face. Calloway stumbled back, cursing and clawing at his eyes. Jade didn't wait. She sprinted past him, yanking open the emergency exit door and diving into the dimly lit stairwell beyond. She hit the bottom steps just as her phone buzzed. Malik, where are you? He asked, breathless. Subway station, Jade panted. I lost Calloway, but they know we're moving. Get to the northbound platform, Malik instructed. Camille's already there. I'll circle back with the car. Jade raced through the underground tunnel, adrenaline drowning out exhaustion. As she reached the platform, Camille waved from the far end, phone pressed to her ear. The DOJ agents are 5 minutes out, Camille called. We just have to hold tight. But 5 minutes was an eternity when the system itself wanted you. Gone. Jade glanced down the tracks. No train in sight. Behind her, footsteps echoed in the tunnel. Heavy, purposeful. Jade's fists clenched. They were closing in. There was no turning back now. She'd come too far, and the truth was, finally, too close to bury. Jade Reynolds stood on the subway platform, heart pounding in her chest as the echo of heavy footsteps filled the tunnel behind her. The dim fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the grimy walls. Camille stood farther. Down the platform, phone still pressed to her ear while Jade's own phone buzzed with another call from Malik. They're closing in, Malik's voice came through, sharp with urgency. "I'm 2 blocks away, but traffic's jammed. You need to get out of there." Jade's eyes flicked to the tunnel. No train lights, no rumble of an approaching car. Just silence, save for the rhythmic thud of boots moving closer. "I don't have time," she muttered. "There's only one exit and they've got it covered." "Then you have to fight," Malik said grimly. "You give up now, they'll bury you before sunrise." Jade swallowed hard. He was right. Surrender wasn't an option, not with everything she'd uncovered, not with the lives on the line if Devereaux and his network continued unchecked. Camille turned, eyes widening as she spotted the figures emerging from the stairwell. 3 men dressed in plain clothes but moving with the precision of professionals. The lead man, bald and broad-shouldered, held a hand to his earpiece, speaking quietly into it. "Jade!" Camille called, backing toward her. "They're not here to arrest you. They're here to end this." Jade's grip tightened around her phone. She didn't doubt it. The system had failed to discredit her, failed to lock her away quietly. Now they were resorting to brute force. The final play when power felt cornered. The lead man stepped forward, hand sliding into his jacket. "Ms. Reynolds," he called, voice eerily calm. "Enough running. Come quietly, and maybe we can work something out." Jade laughed bitterly. "Like you worked things out for Marcus Tate. For every other person Reid and Devereaux threw into prison to pad their pockets." His expression darkened. "Last chance." Jade took a step back, positioning herself between Camille and the edge of the platform. Her mind raced. The train might not come in time, but there was another way out. Through the maintenance tunnel at the far end of the platform. Risky, but less so than trusting the men who'd hunted her across the city. "Camille," Jade muttered. "When I move, follow me. Don't stop, no matter what." Camille's eyes widened, but she nodded. "Got it." Jade raised her hands, feigning surrender. The lead man smirked, gesturing for his team to advance. The moment they took the bait, Jade moved. She spun, grabbing Camille's wrist and yanking her toward the maintenance door. The men shouted, boots pounding against concrete as they gave chase. "Stop now," one of them barked. The unmistakable click of a gun's safety being released, echoing behind them. Jade didn't stop. She hit the rusted door with her shoulder, pain jolting down her arm as it creaked open. Camille stumbled through first, Jade right behind her. The tunnel beyond was narrow, lit by sparse emergency lights. Pipes lined the walls, dripping condensation onto the cracked floor. The air smelled of mildew and dust. "This way," Jade hissed, dragging Camille down the corridor as shouts rang out behind them. A shot fired, the deafening crack reverberating. Through the tunnel, Camille gasped, stumbling as the bullet ricocheted off the wall, narrowly missing her shoulder. Jade clenched her jaw, forcing her legs to move faster despite the burn in her muscles. Ahead, a faint light glowed. An old service exit leading to the street above. But just as hope flickered, another figure appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Officer Calloway. His face was twisted into a cruel grin, gun already raised. Nowhere. Left to run, Reynolds? Jade skidded to a halt, Camille panting beside her, trapped. Forward was Calloway. Backward were the plainclothes operatives, and the walls were too tight for any lateral escape. Calloway stepped closer, gun steady. "You should have known better. The system doesn't lose, not to people like you." Jade's eyes flicked to the side. A rusted valve jutted from the wall, connected to an old steam pipe. It was a gamble, but better than surrender. She raised her hands slowly, voice cold. "Funny thing about systems, Calloway. When enough pressure builds up, they blow." Before he could react, Jade lunged, slamming her fist into the valve. It screeched as it twisted, releasing a jet of scalding steam directly into Calloway's face. He screamed, dropping the gun as he staggered backward, clawing at his eyes. "Go!" Jade shouted, shoving Camille toward the exit. They sprinted past. The writhing officer, boots splashing through puddles as more shouts erupted behind them. Jade didn't look back. The light ahead grew brighter, the cool night air beckoning just beyond the rusted metal door. Camille reached it first, throwing her weight against the handle. It stuck for a moment, then burst open, flooding the tunnel with moonlight. They stumbled into the alley behind the station, breathless and shaking. Malik's car screeched around the corner, tires squealing as he leaned out the window. "Get in!" he shouted. Jade shoved Camille toward the back seat before diving in herself. Malik hit the gas before the door even closed, the engine roaring as they sped down the deserted street. "What the hell happened?" Malik demanded, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Who were those guys?" "Not cops," Jade panted, wiping sweat from her brow. "Private contractors, probably hired by Devereaux's people. They're done pretending this is legal." Malik's face darkened. "Then we hit back hard." Jade nodded, jaw set. "No more hiding. We go public, full exposure, everything." Camille, still catching her breath, looked between them. "Do you realize what that means? Once this goes live, there's no walking it back. They'll throw everything at you." Jade met her gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "They already have, but this time, the whole world will be watching." As the car sped toward the safe house, Jade pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Marcus Tate, for every name buried in Reid's case files, for every life. The system had crushed to protect its own power. The trap had tightened around her. But Jade was done playing defense. Now she was setting her own trap. And this time, the system itself was the prey. Jade Reynolds sat in the back seat of Malik's car, the glow of her phone screen illuminating her determined expression. The city blurred past the window, streetlights casting fleeting shadows across her face. Camille sat beside her, silent, but alert, while Malik gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "They've crossed every line," Jade muttered, scrolling through the evidence folder on her phone. "No more waiting. No more playing defense." Malik glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What's the plan? Because if we go public with everything, they'll come down on us like a hammer." Jade's eyes hardened. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. We don't just expose them. We make it impossible for them to cover it up." She opened a secure messaging app and forwarded the entire evidence package: emails, bank transfers, sealed case files, and recorded threats to multiple targets: the Department of Justice, major news outlets, civil rights organizations, and even sympathetic lawmakers. Each message was accompanied by a single line: "This corruption goes all the way to the top. The people deserve to know." Malik's phone buzzed almost immediately. He glanced down, eyes widening. "It's already spreading. The hashtag #GeneJusticeForJade is trending, and someone leaked the ethics board's attempts to disbar you." Jade leaned back against the seat, exhaling slowly. "Good. Let them try to silence me now." The car screeched to a halt outside Malik's apartment, an old brick building with multiple exits. Easy to defend, easier to escape from. They hurried inside, locking the door behind them. Malik immediately set up his laptop, opening multiple news streams. One by one, headlines began flashing across the screen. "Whistleblower Prosecutor exposes judicial corruption linked to private prison kickbacks." Emails reveal State Attorney General's office colluded to silence federal investigation. Systemic racism and corruption uncovered in city's judicial system. Federal probe launched. Jade's phone buzzed again. Camille glanced at the screen and whistled low. "The DOJ just confirmed receipt of your files. They've officially opened an investigation." But even as hope flickered to life, the reality of their situation hit hard. Jade stood by the window, peering through the blinds. Two black SUVs had pulled up across the street. Men in suits, earpieces glinting under the streetlights, stood guard. "They're not giving up," Jade muttered. "Devereaux's people won't back down until they've crushed us." Malik cursed under his breath. "We need to move. They'll storm this place if they think we're cornered." Jade's mind raced. They couldn't keep running forever. The only way to win was to force the system's hand, to make the corruption so visible, so undeniable, that even Devereaux's allies couldn't shield him. "Forget running," she said suddenly. "We draw them out, make them show their hand." Camille frowned. "How?" Jade tapped her phone, initiating a live stream. The camera flickered to life, broadcasting her face to the world. Within seconds, thousands of viewers flooded in, the comment section scrolling faster than she could read. "My name is Jade Reynolds," she began, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I'm a federal prosecutor, and I've uncovered a network of corruption that goes beyond one judge or one courtroom. This system, our system, has been hijacked by powerful men who profit from injustice, and now they're trying to silence me." Malik's eyes widened, but he didn't stop her. This was the moment they had been building toward, the moment the fight became too public to contain. Jade held up her phone, displaying screenshots of the emails linking Devereux to Judge Reid, the city attorney's office, and even the state attorney general. This isn't speculation, it's fact, and the people responsible are willing to do anything to keep it quiet. Outside, the men near the SUVs were already on their radios, pacing with agitation. The world was watching now. Any move against Jade would be seen by millions. Jade continued, voice firm. "To everyone watching, this fight isn't just mine, it's for Marcus Tate, for every person who's been railroaded by a corrupt system, for every black life devalued for profit. We deserve better, and we won't stop until justice is served." The viewership count ticked past 100,000. News outlets picked up the feed, broadcasting it across their platforms. The system's shadowy defenders could no longer operate in silence. Suddenly, Malik's laptop chimed. He leaned in, eyes widening. "Jade, the DOJ just issued arrest warrants for Judge Reid, for the city attorney, and for Charles Devereux." Jade's breath caught. It was happening. The walls were finally crumbling, but the fight wasn't over yet. The men outside the SUVs moved toward the building, no longer subtle. One lifted a radio to his mouth, speaking quickly. Jade's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered, voice sharp. Reynolds, a familiar voice, cold and controlled, spoke on the other end. "You really think you've won?" It was Devereux himself. "You think a few documents and headlines can bring down an empire?" Jade's grip tightened on the phone. "Empires fall, Devereux, especially when they're built on lies and blood." He chuckled darkly. "You're playing with fire and you're about to get burned." The line went dead. Malik swore. "We need to get out, now." But Jade shook her head. "No, let them come. This time the world is watching." The front door rattled as someone tried the handle. Camille stood ready, phone in hand, already dialing the DOJ contact. Outside, sirens wailed. Flashing blue and red lights cut through the night as federal agents swarmed the block. The SUVs tried to peel away, but unmarked cars blocked their path. Men outside froze, caught between orders and self-preservation. Jade stepped to the window, watching as agents in tactical gear moved in. She recognized one of them, Agent Parker, the DOJ contact Camille had called earlier. The door burst open, but it wasn't Devereux's men. It was Parker, badge held high. "Jade Reynolds," he called, eyes scanning the room. "You're safe. We've got them." Jade's knees nearly buckled with relief. Malik let out a shaky laugh, collapsing into the chair by his laptop. Camille wiped a hand down her face, disbelief etched into her features. Outside, Devereux himself was dragged from the back of one of the SUVs, handcuffed and furious, shouting about how this was all a misunderstanding. Judge Reid was next, face pale under the streetlights. The city attorney followed, silent and resigned. The system had finally turned on its own. Jade stepped into the cool night air, breathing deeply for the first time in what felt like forever. Reporters crowded the barricades, cameras flashing as they captured the fall of once untouchable men. Agent Parker approached, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Reynolds, your evidence was the tipping point. The DOJ is launching a full-scale investigation into judicial corruption across the state." Jade nodded, exhaustion washing over her. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was systemic accountability, the kind Marcus Tate and countless others had been denied for too long. "Thank you," she murmured. "But this fight isn't over. Cleaning up corruption is one thing. Rebuilding trust, that's the real battle." Parker smiled faintly. "One step at a time, Ms. Reynolds. And tonight, you took the first one." Jade glanced at the flashing lights, the handcuffed officials, and the reporters shouting questions into the night. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. The system had tried to break her, but in the end, it was the system itself that shattered. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. And Jade Reynolds wasn't done fighting yet. The story of Jade Reynolds isn't just about one woman standing up to corruption. It's about what happens when the system, designed to protect justice, is weaponized against those it was meant to serve. It's a harsh reminder that power, when left unchecked, can destroy lives, fuel injustice, and silence voices that dare to speak out. But it's also proof that resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to the truth can bring even the most fortified walls of corruption crashing down. Jade's journey revealed an uncomfortable reality. Corruption isn't always loud and obvious. It often hides behind titles, legal jargon, and polished reputations. People like Judge Reid, Charles Devereux, and their allies thrived not because they were invincible, but because too many turned a blind eye, believing the system was too big to fight. But Jade showed us that no system, no matter how deeply rooted in injustice, is immune to exposure when the truth shines brightly enough. The lesson here is clear. Silence enables oppression. Speaking up comes with risks. Jade faced threats, betrayal, and attempts to ruin her life. But every risk she took chipped away at a corrupt empire, making way for real accountability. Her fight wasn't just for herself, but for every person the system had failed, for every life unfairly derailed by prejudice and greed. Now, the question is, what would you do if you were in Jade's shoes? Would you risk everything to expose the truth, or would fear hold you back? Comment number 1 if you believe standing up for justice is worth the fight no matter the cost. Like and subscribe if you think stories like Jade's deserve to be heard. And don't forget to share this story, because awareness is the first step toward change. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice doesn't happen by accident. It happens when ordinary people like Jade and like you refuse to back down. Stay safe, stay aware, and keep fighting for what's right. Until next time.